All right, so it looks like we'll be ready in a second. Let me just get our notes open and we can get started.
You get tired of stuff falling between your fingers.
All right, we'll hold on to that one for a second.
My sword's done getting.
All right, it'll only take another minute. My computer is extremely slow right now because I'm backing up a bunch of files and it's really getting, I think I'm just dying to know when this is going to be over, but all right, hold on. All right, we're almost there. Almost. All right. So anyway, so I think if I remember correctly, last week we were not 100% done with our discussion about the history of exchange rates. And so the one video I don't think we had time to watch was the one about the creation of the euro. So before we carry on with chapter 7, I think we might as well take a look at this last video that I put together, or I didn't put together, that I found. And this is a very interesting quick overview of the history of the euro, which, as you know, or may not know, has only been around since 1999. Now, the euro is, of course, the common currency used by 20 different European countries. And in order to get into the euro or to use the euro, there's a lot of requirements, among them being you're supposed to be a member of the European Union. Now, the European Union is different from European Monetary Union. European Union is actually a free trade agreement that's been around since at least, if I remember correctly, the 50s. And so it started out as a way of reducing tariffs between different European countries to encourage trade among the members. And of course, they increase their standards of living. Now, it wasn't until quite a bit later that the idea of having a common currency came about. And so it was one of these things that was talked about for many, many years. But finally, the Treaty of Maastricht was signed in the early 90s, and this committed the countries who signed it to take steps to become members of this brand new European Monetary Union. And so in order to get into the EMU, as it's called, you have to be a member of the European Union. So there's other requirements too. There are restrictions, for example, on how much debt you can have and on the level of interest rates you can have. And in fact, in the first round of memberships, Greece was supposed to be a member, but they failed some of the tests, so they had to wait till the second round. And so originally there were 11 members in 1999, and eventually that grew to 20, which is what we see today. Okay, so it's a very interesting idea of having 20 countries sharing a common currency. This is unheard of throughout economic history. I mean, in the past, there have been currency unions, but only with very small numbers of countries, like 2 or 3, let's say. This is the first time we've had such a large currency union, and a lot of people didn't believe it could work. But so far, here it is 25 years later, and it's still going strong. So I guess it's here to stay. Anyway, so this video is a very well put together introduction to the creation of the euro, which I'd like everyone to see. And then we can go on and start chapter 7. Okay. But before we do that, I do want to mention one interesting thing. I have classes in the daytime as well as this class at Manhattanville. And I don't know where I got the idea that the spring break is the week of hold on one second. Let me get a calendar up here. All right, here we go. So right now, of course, is the 4th. I wrote down in my calendar that the week of the 17th is the Manhattanville spring break, and that turned out not to be correct. It turns out that the school is closed next week. In fact, I'll tell you what, let me just show you real quickly. I wonder if maybe they changed it, because I wrote up that calendar like in December. I don't know if any of you were aware of this, but it does change things a little bit for us, not too much. Here we go. MVille academic calendars. And you can see right here, clear as day, spring break is March 8th through March 16th. And that means next Tuesday is part of spring break. Now, I had this conversation with Jean Mann, at the beginning of the semester, and she said, yes, in spite of whatever you see on the internet, this class is supposed to have a spring break too. So it looks like next week we're not going to meet because that is part of spring break. All right, I just want to let everyone know that, because I wasn't even aware of this myself until a couple of days ago. So, and even then I found out purely by accident. So I'm not sure how that happened, but here it is in black and white. You can see that our spring break is next week, not in 2 weeks, which is what I originally believed. So it just means that next week will be off, and I'll certainly remind you all of that. I'll send you all an email and just say, by the way, we're not meeting this week. Then when we resume again on the 18th, what we have to do is choose a date when we are supposed to meet in person. Because if you remember from the beginning of the course, we did meet in person that one time. It was understood that we're supposed to meet altogether 3 times in person. I don't think the school cares when those 3 dates are, but we have to have 3 in-person meetings. Now, the exact reasoning behind this is mysterious to me. I have no idea what that's all about, but they did tell us that we have to have 3 in-person meetings. And so next week, not next week, sorry, in 2 weeks when we meet again, we'll have this discussion. We'll see if there's a night that everybody would prefer to avoid, because it doesn't make any real difference to me what night we meet in person. But I would like to ask everyone's opinion and find out if there's any night that's unusually bad for anyone. Okay, so that's what I wanted to mention right up front. Now, what I'd like to do, like last week, is I'd like to send you a link to this video for the Euro so you can watch it where you are, because if I try to show it to you here, I know from experience you may not be able to hear it. And then we could also run into copyright problems. So I'll be pausing the recording while this is going on. Right. So let me just quickly send you the link, which you'll see, by the way, is in Brightspace, and you can watch it at home at your leisure, but I'd like us to watch it right now. And so this is in chapter 6 still. And yeah, we saw all these other ones, I believe. So let's just take a quick look at this one. Here's here's the link.
It's the premium garment of
All right, here it is. Let me send it to you. And once you take, it looks like it's about, oh, it doesn't say, it's about 5 minutes long or so, right? I'm thinking. All right, so there's the link. So I'm going to pause and watch it on this side. And then when we're done, we can move on to chapter 7, okay? All right.
45 liter by half day.
Hello and welcome to EU History Explained. In this series, we try to present today's European biology. Today, we're going to talk about something that many of us learn about schools. Before we begin, a few interesting facts. Although the euro is a common currency of the EU, not all member states are it. It is an example of what we call differentiated speech. However, member states are house for objective prevent the euro has the same name in all EU respectively, and difference in meaning. Let's not start from history. Although it wasn't the euro last 20 years, some action starts last early. A treaty of Rome outlines census of the roads. However, until the late 1960s, the need for monetary programs is not very high, because the stability of the national monetary system is ensured, so-called livelihoods are made. Management is based on fixed US dollar and dollars are flexible. Rental system this stuff
So that was a brief history of the euro. So now we want to move on to chapter 7 because 7 is actually a very complicated chapter. It involves a concept that we may have discussed before, but now we're going to spend a lot more time looking at the notion of arbitrage, which is a very important idea in the financial markets and especially in the derivatives markets. But first, we want to introduce the whole idea of arbitrage, and we're going to then see that there are two very important types of arbitrage that can take place in the currency markets, and how if market prices are misaligned with each other, clever traders can spot these inconsistencies and use that to make money at the expense of their trading partners. So we'll introduce this concept of arbitrage first. And so arbitrage, as you can see, and this is, by the way, the appendix that I wrote for this chapter, is a situation where risk-free profits can be earned by simultaneously buying a relatively underpriced asset and then selling at the same time a relatively overpriced asset. Now, here's an example that's very simple. Imagine that we have a scenario where gold is selling for $1,500 per ounce in the United States. Let's say there's a metals dealer in New York City that is giving us a quote of $1,500 an ounce. And at the same time, though, there's a dealer in London who's charging or quoting 900 pounds per ounce for an ounce of gold. Okay, so they're saying that we will buy and sell gold at this price. Now, at the moment, the exchange rate between the dollar and the pound is $1.50 per pound. So the question is whether or not there's an arbitrage opportunity. Now, arbitrage can only take place if markets are inconsistent with each other. So between the price of gold in the United States, the price of gold in the United Kingdom, and the exchange rate between the dollar and the pound, all three of them have to be consistent with each other. In other words, it must be the case that after adjusting for the exchange rate, the price must be the same in both countries. So the question is whether or not that's true with these numbers. All right, so how do we figure that out? What we have to do is find out what would happen if we, let's say, convert the pound price into dollars. All right, so you can see on the next slide that, let's say that, again, New York or the United States, gold is 1,500 per ounce. Sorry, in the United Kingdom, 900 pounds is equivalent to $1,350 because the exchange rate is currently at $1.50 per pound. So you see the situation here. So that means that we can say in this case that in the United States, gold is relatively overpriced. And in the United Kingdom, it's relatively underpriced. Okay, now this is a situation that's ripe for traders taking advantage of it, because you can see what a trader could do if they notice this right away, that they could actually go into the UK, they can buy an ounce of gold for $1,350, and then they can have it shipped to the United States where they could, in principle, sell it for $1,500 an ounce. Now, if you notice here, we're assuming that we can buy and sell it at these same prices, which is probably a very strong assumption. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that that's the case. You can see there's an opportunity here to make profits. Every ounce of gold that we buy in the United Kingdom for $1,350 is being sold in the United States for $1,500. So every time we do this, we should be putting $150 in our pockets. And that's what we call arbitrage. Okay. Now, of course, we have to take into account the fact that there are transactions costs involved. You can't just ship gold across the ocean for free. But let's just say that the cost of doing this is less than $150 an ounce. So let's say it's 100. So as long as transactions costs are less than $150 an ounce, this will lead to arbitrage profits. Meaning that we're able to take advantage of the mispricing of gold between the two countries. So if we assume, like I said, that let's say the transactions costs are $100 an ounce, we'll still make $50 an ounce from this mispricing between the two countries. Now, of course, this won't last very long, because what will happen is, if one trader notices, many other traders will notice the same thing, and they'll start piling on. And before you know it, everybody is buying gold in the United Kingdom at $1,350 an ounce and selling it in the United States for $1,500. So what that means then is that in the process of doing this, we're buying gold in the UK for $1,350 because of supply and demand. Everyone buying the gold will force the price up because the demand for gold in the United Kingdom has now gone up. So you might recall from our supply and demand diagrams, if the demand curve shifts to the right, This is gold in the US, sorry, the UK. You can see that when the demand curve shifts to the right, the price goes up. Okay. At the same time, though, gold is being sold in the United States for $1,500 an ounce. That means the supply is going up. So the supply curve shifts to the right. The price of gold in the United States is going down. And again, this one is price of gold in the US. Right? That means then that as this arbitrage is exploited by traders, the price of gold in the UK is rising, it's falling in the United States, and what will happen is eventually the two will meet again. They'll be the same, and then arbitrage opportunities will be gone. In other words, the price will be the same in both countries. So it'll meet somewhere in the middle, and then before you know it, the price is equalized again, and therefore there will be no further arbitrage opportunities. So you can see this situation will take care of itself because of the activities of traders trying to take advantage of it. Now, how long will this last? Well, in the past, let's say in the 80s, let's say, there used to be jobs on Wall Street for people who would engage in this type of activity. They were called arbitrageurs because this is what they did all day. An arbitrageur, very fancy sounding name, is a trader who specializes in arbitrage. And it used to be that there were actual positions for people whose business was finding arbitrage opportunities because markets were not quite as efficient as they are now. Computers existed, but they were not nearly as fast as they are now. And also keep in mind, I mean, the internet has only realistically been available to individuals since the mid 90s. So before that, how were trades made? By the telephone? All right, you would look in the Wall Street Journal, or you call other dealers and call around on Wall Street and say, "What are you hearing about gold? What price are you offering? What price are you selling?" And then they buy and sell with each other over the phone, and you could easily see how there could be potential opportunities for temporary mispricings between these different markets. Now, of course, everything's done on the computer. The internet is incredibly fast. Everybody has access to the same data. So it makes you wonder, well, how does arbitrage take place now? Well, it does and it doesn't. The thing is, it's not that markets are ever going to be perfectly efficient, but what has to happen now for arbitrage to take place is some hedge funds specialize in this type of thing. And what they have to do is they have massive computers continuously monitoring market prices throughout the world and are programmed to look for arbitrage opportunities. If they arise in the first place. Now, when these opportunities do arise, and they still do, even at this point in time, the discrepancies are typically extremely small. Like, fractions of a penny, let's say. It's like, imagine if we discovered that gold is the same in both countries, but the difference is like a tenth of a cent or something ridiculous like that. So how in the world do they make money from that? Well, here's what has to happen. Two things. Number one, these opportunities are not only very small, but they disappear extremely fast, so fast that typically human beings can't really take advantage of them. Because by the time you get on your computer and place an order, the opportunity is gone. So here's what has to happen. The computers are programmed to execute transactions when arbitrage opportunities are identified. So those computers are doing all the trading. Computers are literally making the trades. When the computer notices there's a very small discrepancy between gold prices in New York and London, um, it is programmed to go ahead and make the trades. And but because the discrepancies are so small, the only way they can be profitable is that the trades are usually financed with a great deal of borrowed money. So imagine a hedge fund borrowing $1 million and using it to jump into and make an arbitrage. By borrowing that much money, their position is much more highly leveraged. So an opportunity to earn, let's say, 0.00001% might, after using $1 million of borrowed money, translate into an opportunity to earn, let's say, 15 or 20%. The problem with that, though, is that these types of transactions are highly leveraged, which means that they're incredibly risky. Because what happens if something well, let's say that by the time that even when the computer makes the transaction, the opportunity is gone, and they end up accidentally overpaying, let's say, for the gold, or paying more than the money they borrowed. So they could end up losing enormous amounts of money if something goes wrong. So these types of transactions are terribly, terribly risky. And they don't occur very often. And when they do, they usually disappear within like fractions of a second. So while this technically can be done, it's a horribly risky activity to be involved with. And it can lead to a lot of disastrous losses. In fact, something like 1 out of 3 hedge funds goes out of business every year. And this is why, because what they're doing is they're engaging in dreadfully risky transactions, hopefully making large amounts of money, but it often doesn't work out that way. So what's interesting about this is that because arbitrage is possible and it can be transacted so quickly, that means markets are incredibly efficient. And so the fact that arbitrage can be executed so quickly means that the market prices will rarely stray from their, let's just say they will rarely become inconsistent with each other. Let's put it that way. In other words, market prices will be accurate virtually all the time. Okay, because we know that if they stray from their correct levels, we know that arbitrage will take place and push them back to where they belong. It's almost like some people have compared arbitrage in the financial markets to gravity in physics. It's what holds everything together, basically. So so we know that, and then the faster that computers get, and the more data becomes available. And by the way, that's a huge part of it too. The fact that data is available so rapidly and there's so much of it. In other words, we're looking at transactions not minute by minute or second by second, but nanosecond by nanosecond. So markets are becoming more and more efficient, meaning that arbitrage opportunities will rarely arise, if ever. Okay. So anyway, now in this particular case, if you notice, we were dealing with gold. Because gold is a physical commodity, we call this goods arbitrage. And the only unfortunate thing about this is that it is likely to have large transactions costs because we do need to physically move the gold from one market to the next in order to make this happen. So because of this, most of the time, arbitrage takes place not so much with metals like gold, let's say, but financial securities where the transactions costs are extremely minimal. Like in other words, buying the stocks of one country and selling the stocks of another. There's some cost there, but not like there would be with gold. So most arbitrage opportunities take place with financial securities due to the low transactions costs. Not that it's impossible, but you don't see it as often. And also another problem that arises with goods arbitrage is that it's important to ensure that the quality of the product itself is the same in each market. So in other words, that's not a problem with gold, but for certain other types of commodities, that could become an issue. So in other words, arbitrage can't really take place unless you're trading the exact same good in both markets. But I think this is a good, simple example to get the ball rolling with arbitrage and try to understand what exactly it's all about. Now, I mean, imagine this case where you could, let's say that you are in a position where you can buy and sell merchandise because you have a retail store. And when things go on sale at somebody else's store, you can buy them up and sell them in your own store at a higher price. That could be thought of as a type of goods arbitrage as well. Although, that's a little different because you can't guarantee that you'll be able to sell that merchandise, at least not very quickly. Now, with all that background in arbitrage, what we're going to do is identify two types of arbitrage that can take place in the currency markets. And the first one is something called triangular arbitrage. Now, you'll see in a few minutes why it's called that. But what's happening here is that this involves two currencies and a cross exchange rate. So remember cross exchange rates. Let's go back and quickly review that. From way back in the beginning of the course, a cross exchange rate, or sometimes they're called cross rates, is an exchange rate that does not involve the dollar. Okay. So, or at least not directly. So if you go to say the Bloomberg or Wall Street Journal, you can see a few examples of this. So, most of these do involve the dollar, but if you notice, for example, way down here with the euro yen, 159.19. So that number tells me that it takes 159.19 euros to buy, yen to buy a single euro. So because neither of those currencies is the dollar, this is defined as a cross exchange rate. Now, it turns out, though, that going on behind the scenes, this number was created by combining the yen dollar exchange rate with the euro dollar exchange rate. And the result is this number. So in other words, ultimately, all currencies in the market are priced in terms of the dollar. The dollar is in the unique position of being the so-called world's vehicle currency. And again, we mentioned this earlier in the course. So the dollar is the world's, at the moment, exchange rates are ultimately quoted in terms of dollars. Okay, so cross exchange rates are obtained from $2, two quotes involving the dollar, let's say. Now, you're probably wondering, why is this? Why does every currency have to be quoted against the dollar? Well, besides the fact that we have the largest economy in the world, it turns out that it's for convenience. Okay, so in other words, the existence of a vehicle currency is highly efficient because the number of exchange rates that are needed equals the number of currencies in the world, of course. And then these can be used to define any cross exchange rates that are needed. All right, so let me just throw a quick example up here. Let's just say, just as a quick example, let's say that we live in a tiny little world where the only currencies are the dollar, the pound, and the euro. Okay, now by using a vehicle currency, only two exchange rates are needed. Dollars per pound and dollars per euro. The cross exchange rate, euros per pound, can be derived from the dollars pound and dollars per euro exchange rates. Let me show you how that would work. So in a world with three currencies, we really only need two unique exchange rates to cover every contingency. So let's say you have, let's keep it simple, $1.50 per pound. And let's say $1.10 per euro. What about euros per pound? What you could do is have so algebraically, this is what you actually have. Now, the ratio of those two, 150 per 110 over 110 is about 1.3636 per euro, per pound rather. Okay, so you've got two exchange rates that involve the dollar, and you also have euros per pound. Now, without the vehicle currency, what you would need instead is you'd have to have unique exchange rates between the dollar and the pound, dollar euro. And then euro pound. Now that doesn't sound like a lot. No, there's three instead of two. It doesn't sound like a lot, but If instead you had more, like the more currencies there are in the country, in the world rather, the more quotes you would need when there's no vehicle currency. So in other words, here, 3 countries, 3 currencies. So if you had, let's say, 10 countries, suddenly the number of exchange rates you would need without a vehicle currency could be like 20 or 30, let's say, because you would need one quote for each pair of currencies. So let's say if you had 10 currencies in the world, with 10 countries in the world, there would be um 55. Actually, let me just double check this real quickly on my calculator. $45, sorry. You'd have 45 pairs of currencies, each of which would require its own unique exchange rate. Um, um, Without a vehicle currency. Compared with 9, and it's always one less than the number of countries. So in other words, that's a lot of information, a lot of trading, a lot of market making, a lot of information that's needed to properly express the relationships between these currencies. If you didn't have a vehicle currency, it would be like an analogy to that would be what would happen? Imagine a time when there was no money, and we had to use barter to trade goods between each other. With a dollar, the number of prices needed in the economy equals the number of goods that are available for sale. So let's say we had 1 million items that are possible to buy. You need 1 million prices, but if you don't have those, every possible trade you could make would need its own unique price. For example, how many heads of lettuce do I have to trade for an ounce of cheese or something like that would need its own price. And then I would need the same thing for lettuce per gallon of milk, and that kind of thing. So in other words, you would have all these different exchange rates that would be needed if you didn't have the dollar as your currency. And here the vehicle currency serves the same role. All right, so that's why we have a vehicle currency, and for efficiency reasons. And the dollar, of course, is the vehicle currency because the U.S. has, of course, by far the largest economy in the world. And I think I mentioned this once before that it used to be the British pound that was the vehicle currency because, of course, all those centuries, they were by far the most dominant economy in the world, especially when they had the British Empire. But of course, World War I is pretty much what put an end to that. After that, the United States started to really dominate militarily and economically. And so soon enough, the dollar became the world's vehicle currency. All right, now let's take a look at an example of the relationship between 2 exchange rates that involve the dollar. And at cross exchange rates. So actually, before we even look at that one, let me try a different one for a second. Well, actually, no, we don't need another example. This is the one. This one works. So you can see that this exchange rate between the euro and the pound came about by simply combining the dollar pound and the euro dollar exchange rates. But now, if you notice too, I had to multiply. Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm dividing, but see, in other words, what I did was I divided these two, but this is equivalent to multiplying the one in the numerator by its inverse. Okay, so to get to this point, to find the euro per pound exchange rate, requires us to divide of the dollar pound exchange rate by the dollar euro. And by the way, if you're not sure which way to go, which one you should divide, or if you should possibly even multiply, what you have to do is line up the currencies and make sure that the right ones are being canceled out. Like in this case, we wanted to cancel out all the dollars. If I had done this incorrectly by trying to divide, let's say, the $1.10 per euro by the $1.50, I would have found pretty quickly that I had something wrong. So in all these cases where we're trying to create a cross exchange rate, we're either multiplying or we're dividing. Okay, so any way you look at it, you can always calculate a cross exchange rate by taking $2 quotes and combining them somehow. But now here's the interesting question. What if I had this situation in my hands? I find that, let's say I start with the $2 per pound for the exchange rate in, let's say, London. Or no, here's actually New York, sorry. In New York City, there's a dealer who's quoting us $2 per pound. And again, there's an implicit assumption in these cases that I can buy and sell at these prices. In reality, we have bid-ask spreads, which complicates things, but let's just keep it simple and think in terms of buying and selling at this price. Now, we also discover a dealer in Tokyo. I'm going to make a little list here to keep track of everything. Tokyo, we find a dealer who's selling yen at 120 per dollar. And now in this day and age, of course, I'm sitting in front of my screen at work. I've got a Bloomberg terminal. I'm looking at these numbers on my screen, and I'm looking for inconsistencies because I'm looking for possibly an arbitrage opportunity. And then I discover there's a third dealer who's in London now, and they're offering a quote of 250 yen per. Now you look at it and say, well, I see what's happening here. Then you'd think, wait a minute, something's not right here. What do I mean by that? Why don't we try to figure out what the appropriate cross exchange rate is between the yen and the pound using the quotes from New York and Tokyo. So here's the New York quote. And here is the Tokyo quote. And if you notice, by multiplying them together, I've got a very strange situation in my hands. The implied cross exchange rate is 240 yen per pound. This is the one that's consistent with the two exchange rates involving the dollar. But yet, this dealer in London is offering me 250 yen per pound. Now, you can see all of a sudden we start thinking, isn't this an arbitrage opportunity? And the answer is yes, it is. Okay, because something is inconsistent. That something, in this case, is that cross exchange rate. It's not consistent with the two underlying quotes, $2 per pound and 120 yen per dollar. So the question is, as a trader whose job is to make money no matter what, how do I figure out a way to exploit this? In other words, how would I, well, first, I concede that it's an arbitrage. because otherwise the prices would have to be equal in order for there not to be an arbitrage. So once I know that it is an arbitrage opportunity, the question is, how do I take advantage of it? Now, it's not quite as simple as it sounds. It's not like with the gold case where I just buy the gold in one country and sell it in the other. That was easy because now there's three assets being involved here. The quote in New York, the quote in Tokyo, the quote in London. So I have to do something a lot more complicated than simply buying where it's cheap and selling where it's expensive. And so because, again, there's three currency quotes here, you'll see in a second that this is where the name triangular arbitrage comes from. So we're going to set up a very special kind of graph here. Let me jump ahead a little bit and see if I can, here it is. Now you can see where the name triangular comes from. What we're going to do is set up this little chart, and you're going to see that in the bottom left-hand corner, we have US dollars. In the top, we have Great British pounds or Great Britain pounds. Down here in the bottom right, we have Japanese yen. So remember the three quotes: New York, $2 per pound; Tokyo, $120 per dollar, from way back here. And then the one that we are skeptical about, the one in London, 250 yen per pound. So because the implied is 240 yen per pound, our job here is to buy pounds at 240 yen and sell them to this dealer in London for 250 yen per pound. In other words, the dealer is offering to overpay for each pound. They're offering us 250 when we know perfectly well that they're only worth 240. So here's how we're going to work this. Let's say that this is a trader at a major commercial bank. They have $1 million of the bank's money to play with. So we start down here with $1 million. And we're going to trade those for pounds at this quote of $2 per pound. All right. So we're going to find ourselves with 500,000 pounds up here. Why is it 500,000? Because that's why. Now, why did I do that, by the way? Because what I want to do now is take all those pounds and trade them into that London dealer at 250 yen each. And this right here is the source of my profits. So in other words, I want to get my hands on all the yen the pounds that I can get my hands on and exchange each one of them to this dealer at 250 yen each. So since the bad quote is in terms of pounds per yen per pound, what I need to do as an American trader is get my hands on pounds and use those pounds to buy as many yen as I can. Okay. Or I'm sorry, to buy take my pounds and trade them for as many yen as I can. So if I multiply 500,000 pounds times 250 yen per pound, what do I get? So if you notice, the pounds cancel out, and I'm left with 125 million yen. Now, I don't actually want yen because I'm an American trader. So not a problem. I'll go into Tokyo with my yen and trade them back to dollars at this quote in Tokyo of 120 yen per dollar. So for this one, I'm actually dividing. And it turns out, you can see down here in the bottom left-hand corner, my final result is those yen are worth $1,041,667. So in a matter of seconds, I've taken $1 million, made a few trades, and suddenly I have $1,041,667. So that means that what's left over, the difference between the two, my arbitrage profit is $41,667. Where did that money come from? I didn't work for that, did I? Not really. I just took advantage of an inconsistent pricing in the marketplace. But it involves 3 trades instead of just 2. Before, remember, we bought gold in one country, we sold in the other. Here we have to make 3 transactions because of the way that this thing works. We're using 2 exchange rates involving the dollar and one that does not. So there's 3 transactions necessary to exploit this process. Now, what's interesting here is that had we been given the correct quote in the first place, right here, if it was 240 per yen per pound, by the time we got back to the starting point, we would have ended up with $1 million. Okay, so in other words, if this cross exchange rate is at the correct level, this won't help us one little bit. We'll go around the circle and we'll end up with the same amount of money that we started out with. Another interesting point here is that what if we'd done this in reverse? What if instead I started in the United States and I bought yen, which I then traded for pounds, and then I brought them back to the United States? Then I would have lost money. Okay, in other words, by going in the wrong direction, I'm reversing everything. In other words, then I would be buying something that's too expensive and selling something that's too cheap. And of course, that means I would lose money. And I know it right away because I'd end up with a negative number. So now, of course, something like this has to be set up just like that. And so you can see in this day and age, computers would be taking care of all this behind the scenes because any discrepancies would be very, very small and they would only last for like fractions of a second. And so some computer could dive in there and maybe grab this opportunity. But it's not likely that people will be able to do this like in the past. Like I said, when you could pick up the phone and call all these different dealers and make trades. Now this would all be done by computers. And even then, the opportunities would disappear very, very quickly. But as long as that's a possibility, it means this number is highly unlikely to be incorrect, even for a small period of time. But if it is, we can jump in there and take advantage of it and make profits. Now, one other thing I want to mention here is that had we started with pounds in the UK, it would just mean that we'd start up here with pounds and we work our way around the triangle until we find ourselves with pounds at the end. So the starting point is not relevant for something like this. It's not the case that we have to start in the United States. You could start in any one of these circles and any one of these markets. As long as you're going in the correct direction, you'll be all set. If you go the wrong way, you're asking to lose money. And of course, as you can imagine, as we keep doing this, the prices will adjust themselves until there are no more opportunities. Okay. Possibly the dealer in London will realize his mistake and say, oops, I changed my quote to 240 and now the opportunity is gone. Okay. Especially when he sees his screen, as a dealer, you expect to have you're going to be buying for some customers, you're going to be selling to others. All of a sudden, all of your customers are lining up to buy yen from you and pay with pounds, and you're thinking, wow, what's going on here? Why is there a sudden surge in demand for my yen? I must be quoting it wrong. All right. So this, in a nutshell, is what triangular arbitrage is all about. We don't normally see this with other markets here because we do have this notion of cross exchange rates. And so here they're explaining it more in English, where the quoted cross exchange rate is too high in the sense that too many yen are being offered per pound, which means you could think of the yen as being overpriced. Think of the yen as being relatively overpriced, just like we had gold before. Yen is overpriced. Actually, I should say relatively overpriced. And then the pound is relatively underpriced. In principle, a currency isn't going to ever be like for over or underpriced in the sense that these exchange rates are determined by supply and demand. So we think of it as relatively overpriced, relatively underpriced, meaning that based on the same market factors, yen has a price that's too high to be consistent with those market factors, and the pound is too low or inexpensive to be consistent with those same market factors. So with respect to the same market factors, the price of the yen is too high and the pound is too low, which implies that what you need to do is buy pounds and sell yen. But that's exactly what we did here. As we moved around this triangle, here we buying pounds. And over here in Japan, we sell yen. Right? So that's how we made all of our money. Wow. So this is a very complicated, yes. Oh, I didn't realize I'd done this. Yes, I wanted everyone to see what would have happened if we went backwards. I'd forgotten that I worked through this example all the way by going the wrong direction. You can see that you would have wound up with $960,000, which implies a loss of $40,000 due to your not doing this correctly. Okay. Now, here's another example that we can look at. Like I mentioned earlier, the starting point is not really relevant. In other words, this example happens to involve an American trader in New York City who's using dollars to make money. But if instead a trader in London noticed this opportunity, yeah, you can see. So I'm using the same amount. In other words, instead of $1 million, I've got £500,000. But again, the whole idea here is I'm moving around the circle in this direction of the triangle, I mean. So I take my £500,000, I exchange them for yen at this overvalued exchange rate, and they give me way too many yen, meaning 125 million yen, when it should have been only 120. And then I can bring those back to the United States and get 1,041,667 at the exchange rate of 120 yen per dollar. And then using the exchange rate of $2 per pound, these are brought back to London and they're worth 520,833.50 pounds. So the profit here is the difference, which is 20,833.50. Now, based on these exchange rates, that's the same profit we earned in the United States. Okay. In other words, in terms of dollars, you multiply this by $2 per pound. You'll see that except for possible rounding differences, 20,833.50 times 2 is 41,667, which we saw earlier is what the American trader ended up earning. So it's the same amount of money, except expressed in a different currency. Okay. And I think I also did the same thing in Japan. Whereas we were a Japanese trader who noticed this opportunity. Same thing, we start in Japan with 125 million yen. And we go around the circle the same way, convert our dollars, yen to dollars, back to pounds, back to yen at this incorrect quote. And you can see the profit is 5,208,075. And if I divide that by 120 yen per dollar, and again, except for possible rounding issues, if I do that, I'm going to wind up with Yeah, this one is a little bit different. 43. 403, let's say. But it's very, very close. Okay. So any way you look at it, as long as you're going in the right direction, you're going to earn profits. All right, hold on one second. There we go. So that's our friend triangular arbitrage. All right. It only works with three markets where you have two quotes between the dollar and a foreign currency and a cross exchange rate that are inconsistent with each other. And in the process of exploiting this, these numbers will adjust themselves until the opportunities are gone. Now, it's possible that these exchange rates will adjust too. It's not just the cross exchange rate, but they will eventually align again with each other after all these profits are made. All right. So that is the concept of triangular arbitrage. What other kinds of arbitrage are there in the currency markets? Well, we have this other one called interest rate parity. What is this all about? All right, well, here's what we have to think about. Let's say that we have a quote. Let's say $1.50 per pound. Now, this exchange rate refers to the immediate the purchase of pounds by an investor, let's say, with dollars for immediate delivery. In other words, if I am getting on a plane to London and I need pounds, I need to have some pounds in my pocket. I can't just walk around without any pounds. The price that I'll pay for immediate delivery, where I take them right away, is called the spot exchange rate. All right, now that's for immediate delivery. All the quotes you see, by the way, let's say in Bloomberg, these are all spot exchange rates. It's understood that these are intended for immediate transactions that take place right away. So if I need to buy euros with my dollars, this is the price that I'll be quoted. Now, what other ways might I want to take delivery of my currency? Why don't I want them immediately? But if you notice that since we looked at this website last, it keeps changing because these markets are open 24/7. Even if the New York markets are closed, and in London, yeah, it's getting pretty late there too, but London is probably still open, but soon enough, then Japan or Tokyo will be open. So no matter what time of the day it is, one of those three major markets is probably still open where trading is taking place in these currency markets. And that runs into the weekends too. It's like literally a 24/7 market. Unlike the stock markets, which have very, very rigid trading hours, as you know, the currency markets never sleep. So anyway, suppose I'm doing business in England. I'm an American company that does business in England. And from time to time, I might need to buy pounds to run my business. A US importer knows that he will need to buy 100,000 pounds in, let's say, 6 months. To pay for, let's say, merchandise that he's already ordered. Let's say you've got a little shop in New York City where it's called everything British, let's say, and everything in your shop is coming from London. All right, so the people who want authentic British goods have to come to your shop. And in 6 months, you've contracted to buy 100,000 pounds worth of British goods. Now, if the current exchange rate is $1.50 per pound, then the risk that the importer faces is that this exchange rate will rise in 6 months. So if, for example, it rises to $2.60, then the cost of the pounds will rise, of course, from $150,000 to $160,000. That's not what we want. That's going to eat into our profits. And this is one of the risky things about doing business overseas. Among other things, we have to worry about exchange rate risk because, if I, as an American company, to buy British goods, I have to expect to pay pounds for them. Um, it might be different if I'm doing business in, let's say, the Caribbean. I'm an American company importing goods from, let's say, Jamaica. They'll probably take my dollars, and then there's no problem for me. But this is different. This is England. They will insist on being paid in pounds, and so I have to be prepared to use them. Now, of course, it's also possible that the exchange rate will go down. That's a possibility too. And by the way, if the exchange rate goes up, remember what that means. This means that the dollar has depreciated and the pound has appreciated. Okay, now on the other hand, if the exchange rate falls to $1.40 per pound, then the cost of the pounds will drop. Well, that would be nice. To $140,000. Okay, but now we know this. But we're in business, but we get that this happens. This fluctuates all the time, but we're terribly worried. Let's say we have very tight profit margins and we don't want to worry about whether we'll gain or lose money on our foreign exchange transactions. So the importer, oh, and by the way, this of course means that the dollar has appreciated and the pound has depreciated. All right, great. So now imagine yourself saying, I don't want to have to deal with any of this type of risk. What option do I have? Well, I can approach an investment bank or a commercial bank that does a lot of business in the foreign exchange markets. The major commercial US banks like Citibank and Chase and all the rest, they're all major foreign exchange dealers. So if you have an account with Chase, let's say, you could go ahead and approach them about what I'm about to show you. The importer could enter into what's called a forward contract with a major foreign exchange dealer to buy 100,000 pounds in 6 months at a predetermined exchange rate. And just as an example, let's say we agree to $1.52 per pound. So that means no matter what happens in the foreign exchange markets in the next 6 months, the cost of the pounds is then guaranteed to be 152,000 per pound, regardless of market conditions. Okay. Now you might say, well, why are we doing this? Because we're losing the opportunity to save money if the dollar gets stronger, but we're also avoiding the problem of a higher exchange rate if the dollar gets weaker. So we may decide that, you know what, we don't want to have to worry about this. Let's just lock in the price. And we're going to do that with this forward contract. So the price that they're giving us, actually, hold on one second. I want to make sure yes. So the spot exchange rate is $1.50 per pound today. We say then that this price, the $1.52 per pound that I agreed to, hold on, my mouse is acting up. Price agreed to in the forward contract, meaning $1.52 per pound, is known as 6-month forward exchange rate. Forward because it'll be delivered in the future. Now, in principle, we can negotiate a forward price for any maturity that we want. We could agree to buy pounds in a year, 9 months, 3 months, whatever the case may be. But there are certain maturities that are more standard than others. You often see these quotes as 3 months, 6 months, or a year. It's usually not the case that these contracts go out much further than that because who knows what's going to happen more than a year in the future. All right, so normally these are quoted with maturities of, let's say, 3, 6, or 12 months. But because these are forward contracts, they're completely negotiable. You could agree to anything you want. You could have like 95 days or something ridiculous like that. So this is a forward exchange rate. And so you're probably wondering, well, where did that come from? In other words, why is the forward exchange rate $1.52 per pound when the spot exchange rate is only $1.50? That's an interesting question. And we're going to see that there's a very precise mathematical relationship that ties together the quote for the spot exchange rate and the quote for the forward exchange rate. And it turns out that the forward exchange rate is derived from the spot exchange rate, maturity, the forward exchange rate, rates, US and the UK. So all those four come into play when we determine this relationship. And here's the part that is relevant for tonight. And that is that the relationship or the mathematical relationship that ties together spot exchange rates and forward exchange rates is known as interest rate parity. And now here's the fun part. If this relationship is violated, in other words, if you're given a quote other than the one implied by this relationship, then there will be opportunities to earn arbitrage profits. So that's why we're talking about this now, because this relationship that I'll show you in a few minutes ties together the spot and forward exchange rate in such a way that this is the only exchange rate, or forward exchange rate, I should say, at which there will be no arbitrage opportunities. For any other quote, there will be arbitrage opportunities. Okay, so in other words, the forward exchange rate implied by interest rate parity condition is the only one at which there will be no arbitrage opportunities in this market. Well, all right then. So we're probably eager to see what this is all about. But before we do that, well, actually, let me show it to you first. We have to remind ourselves the interest rates are actually, in this case, taken from these special markets called the Euro currency markets. Okay, now, what is this all about? So if an American holds dollar deposits outside the United States, let's say in a British bank, these are known as Euro dollars. Now, by the way, the fact that it says Euro doesn't have anything to do with the Euro currency. up until the euro was created, the word euro, the prefix like that meant outside of the country of origin. If a British citizen, let's say, holds pounds outside the UK, say in an American bank, they are known as euro sterling. Now, why sterling? Because whether you realize it or not, the official name of the British currency is the pound sterling. Okay. It's always been that way, but people tend to just call them pounds. Now, there's a lot of theories about why it got that name. It apparently dates back to the early days. The pound, by the way, has been around since at least 800 AD when King Alfred was on the throne. And Alfred the Great, you may remember his name. Yeah, I mean, so the division, this is their old system. After the Norman conquest, the pound was divided into 20 shillings of 12 pennies each. So in other words, there was 240 pence per pound. And that lasted until 1971 when they reformed this so that now it's just 1 pound equals 100 pence. And it's that simple, just like the dollar, $100, or $1 is 100 cents. But by the way, if you ever read British literature from before the 70s, you'll notice a lot of interesting coins are referred to. We had, for example, farthings, which were a quarter of a pence. Half a halfpenny is half a pence. Penny is 1 pence. Threepenny is 3. Sixpence is 6. Shilling is 20. No, sorry, 12. And there's so many of them. It was just like there's so many names for all these different coins they had. Now, the reason why that's relevant is because before paper money was used, or at least started to become accepted, the value of the pound came down to the weight in silver of these coins. So in other words, if you had 20 shillings, each one was a silver coin. And so the weight of those 20 shillings had to be the same as having, let's say, 2 half crowns or whatever the equivalent was. In other words, the weights had to be very specific so that no matter how you made change, the value depended on the amount of silver. So the weight of the coins had to be very specific for their system to work, which it did. In fact, one of the reasons why the pound was always considered to be a strong currency is because if you had a pound coin, you could count on how much silver it actually had in it without necessarily having to weigh it yourself or have it tested. So the pound developed a reputation for being strong and containing the amount of silver that it claimed to have. And so that reputation persisted over the centuries. And but no matter how the pound was denominated, there's so many possibilities here. The silver content had to be the same. Okay. In fact, it says here, Henry II introduced the pre-decimalization. It was based on the Troy system of weighing precious metals. The penny was worth 1 pennyweight worth of silver. Therefore, a pound sterling had 240 pennyweights, or a pound of sterling silver. And there's the name. Okay. And by the way, the symbol that we see for the pound, which you've seen many times, back in the day when only silver coins were being spent as a type of money, it was important to know how much each coin weighed. So the word libra means scales in Latin. And so the pound sign comes from the L in libra because before the coins became standardized, every transaction required the coins to be weighed with a scale to make sure they had a certain amount of silver content. So the pound symbol comes from the fact that the coins had to be weighed on a scale. And so the Latin, like I said, word for scale is libra. So the L gradually turns into the pound sign. Yeah, so you got all this great background. But they man, look at these coins. Well, anyway, but yeah, the how old is the pound? Yeah, I thought they would say right away. Now I oh wait, whoa, here we go. So value of £1 sterling in grams and transit. So you can see they've got it back to the year 800. That's an old currency, okay. So anyway, it became known as the pound. Oh, I remember what brought this up. The word sterling referred to the content of the coins. So and then let's just look at a third example. If a Japanese citizen holds yen outside of Japan, then they are known as euro yen, of course. So the euro currency market consists of all these currencies that are being held outside the country of origin. Most of this is done in London, by the way. London is the major center of the euro currency markets. And these deposits are held with the very highest quality banks. So they're very, very safe. And then the amount of interest that you earn on these deposits depends on which currency you're holding. So in the past, I'll tell you what, I've tried to find quotes on the internet um, for interest rates paid by these deposits. And for some reason, I can't seem to do it. Maybe I didn't know where to look. Oh boy. I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at these quotes, but they're very comparable to the interest rates in the home country. So Eurodollar deposits will tend to have a quote or an interest rate which is not too different from what I could get in a similar bank account in the United States. It's usually a little bit higher, and there's a reason for that. The interest rate paid on a Eurodollar deposit will typically be slightly higher than what is available for similar deposits in the United States. But what I mean by that is how long are you leaving it there? How much money is involved? Why is that? Because these deposits are not subject to US banking regulations. So they can earn a slightly higher rate of interest. Because banking regulations are costly to banks. Okay. So, in other words, they eat into the bank's profits. But if we have a deposit in our bank from the United States where we don't have to worry about US banking regulations, then we can afford to pay these depositors slightly more interest because the US regulators can't reach in and change our cost structure like that, like they would in the United States. So these euro dollar deposits or any euro currency deposits will pay a little bit more than the home country, but that also does bring on a little extra risk because if I keep my dollars in Barclays in London and it goes bankrupt, I may not get my money back. Whereas in the United States, you probably know that Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation guarantees all deposits in the United States. So Anyway, but it's a very large market. And yeah, I didn't think so. I've tried before to find out. I don't know what the problem is. It might be that you have to pay for this information. Well, maybe not. Let's see, Fred might have it. Oh, well, it says here these are euro dollar. Oh, all right. These are euro dollar deposits. And you can see that right about now, oh my God. It's a little outdated. I'm surprised to see that. Oh, no wonder because they're, oh, really? This is very strange. It only goes up to 2000. That's weird. I wonder why. Anyway, so that's a story for another day. But anyway, the reason why this is relevant is because these deposits are considered to be extremely safe. So the rates of interest on these deposits are not exactly risk-free rates, but they're very close to it. So in the relationship that I'm about to show you, the interest rate parity condition that I just mentioned earlier is based on these euro currency rates of interest. So, for example, to determine forward exchange rate in the dollar and the pound, the maturity of the forward contract, spot exchange rate, the euro dollar deposit rate, sterling deposit rate are used. Okay, so the four factors are: what is the spot exchange rate between dollars and pounds? What is the maturity of this forward exchange rate? And what are the rates in the euro dollar and euro sterling markets? All right, so let's tie this together and take a look at this thing. So after all that discussion, here it is. And here we're assuming a 90-day forward exchange rate between the dollar and the pound. And so here it is after all that time. So F is the forward exchange rate. In this case, it's actually the 90-day forward exchange rate. Then we have E, which is the spot exchange rate between the dollar and the pound. Now, R is the euro dollar exchange interest rate. And R star is the euro sterling rate. Now, if you notice here, this is interesting. N is the number of days until the forward exchange rate maturity date. Or I guess what I should say is let's call it the maturity of the forward exchange rate. That's probably a little easier. But it's quoted in days. And if you notice, the denominator in those two ratios is 360. Why not 365? All right, well, that's an interesting question. Because I'll just quickly run through this. each market let's see, how should I put this? For each market in which funds are borrowed or lent, let's put it that way. The interest rates are calculated with a specified day count convention. Okay, now this is a fairly complex topic, so we're not going to get too deeply into it, but the euro currency markets are based on a 3360 convention. This means that each month is treated as 30 days, and each year is treated as 360 days. Okay, so there's a 3-month forward exchange rate means 90 days out of 360, or a quarter of a year. That's the convention in the euro currency markets. Now, in other market, like the treasury bill market, let's say, it might be slightly different. Or so, in other words, there's multiple conventions that could be used. Here, it happens to be 3360, and so that's why in this formula, whatever number of days we have in the numerator, the denominator is always 360. And this condition is the forward exchange interest rate parity condition. It tells us the only forward exchange rate at which there's no arbitrage opportunity. So what we need to do, ooh, it's already getting kind of late. I'll tell you what, why don't we knock it off for about, let's say 15 minutes. We'll come back about 20 after 9, after a little refreshment. And then we'll do a couple of quick, simple examples of this. Now, since we're not meeting next week, in 2 weeks, we're going to have to pick it up right here where we left off. This is a fairly complicated topic, and we don't want to rush through it. So we'll get as far as we can here, but be aware that we will have to go through this again the next time we meet in 2 weeks. Now, what I'm going to do here is go into Cengage and see if that extra week is going to throw off our assignment schedule. Remember, I did tell you up front that I only found out like yesterday that next week is spring break, not the week after that. So I may have to adjust the due dates for assignments. I'd rather not have anything due during spring break if we can avoid it. And I also have to make sure, of course, that we've covered the material you need to do these assignments. So I will take a good hard look and make some adjustments. Most likely the due dates will get pushed up a little bit. Okay, so in the meantime, let's have our break. And when we get back, we'll just run through a couple of simple examples to get the feel for how this works. But the tricky part is showing how to take advantage of this when it's violated, how to make arbitrage profits. It starts to get a little bit messy here. All right, so let's stop for a bit. Let's come back around 20 or so after, and then we'll look at some quick examples of how this relationship works. Okay. All right, so we have time to do a few simple examples here. Since we are going to be off next week, we're going to have to come back and revisit this topic anyway, but I would like you to see how this works in practice. So don't forget that this is the 360 convention in the euro currency markets, which is why the maturities are listed as end days out of 360. And so anyway, let's look at an example. So let's say that we have a $180 euro deposit rate of 2.89%. Now, by the way, that means per year. So you're actually getting over 180 days. Let's say this is 0.0289. So if you leave your money in this euro dollar deposit account for 180 days, the amount you actually earn is going to be 0.01445. All right, which means, of course, 1.445%. So just be aware of that, because this is a 180-day rate. It's 2.89% per year, but for over 180 days or half a year in this market, that's about 1.445%. Now, in the euro sterling market, we have 4.7521%. And so this is our R here. Our star is this one. Another thing I want to point out here is that when you use any algebraic formula with interest rates, you normally convert all the interest rates into decimals. Okay, this formula is no exception. You can see in the next page, we're not going to put 2.89 in here. We're not going to put 4.7521. We're going to use the decimal equivalents. And then finally, the spot exchange rate between the two currencies in this example is 1.8693 per pound. So the question is, what is the implied 180-day forward exchange rate? Which means, what is the only forward exchange rate at which there would be no arbitrage opportunities? So the algebra isn't very difficult. You're just plugging in, as you can see, the value of E here, the US rate here. This is the dollar deposit rate on an annual basis. This is the euro sterling rate. And then this is the number of days until the maturity of the forward exchange rate. In this case, that's 180 days. And if you plug these into your calculator, you'll see that while the spot exchange rate, which is what I can buy pounds for current delivery, is 1.8693 per pound, the 6-month or 180-day forward exchange rate is slightly lower at 1.8523. Now, algebraically, F is lower than E when US rates are lower than UK rates. If it's the other way around, then F would be larger than E. And we'll see why that is when we start doing the arbitrage examples. So that means I can lock in the purchase price of British pounds at 185.23 for delivery in 180 days through a forward contract. Any other rate would represent an arbitrage opportunity. So we sometimes call this the implied forward exchange rate because it comes from this interest rate parity condition, which, by the way, sometimes in the markets, let me just throw this in here, the terminology, since arbitrage results, or arbitrage could result, if the interest rate parity condition is violated, the interest rate parity condition is sometimes called a no arbitrage relationship. Okay, so not all relationships in finance are no arbitrage relationships, of course. you might remember from economics, you have equilibrium relationships where if they're violated, there's no arbitrage opportunities, but the forces of supply and demand force those numbers back to where they belong. So here instead, this relationship is enforced by the possibility of earning arbitrage profits if the relationship is violated. Okay, now here's an interesting side note. Let me just mention this in passing, but if you notice, every one of these examples we've used so far involve the exchange rate of dollars per pound. If this number is quoted as pounds per dollar, that will affect this formula. What you would have to actually do then is, let's say you've got, let me back up for a second here. If I tell you that E is 186.93 per pound, then I could also quote that as so many pounds per dollar. And what you would have to actually do is take 1 divided by 1.8693. And that implies that it would take 0.53, let's say, rounding it to 4 places, 0.4350 pounds per dollar. But if I'm going to quote the exchange rate as pounds per dollar, I have to reverse the numerator and the denominator of this formula. So you notice how all of a sudden I've got the UK rate in the numerator, US rate down here. So because this could get very confusing, what we'll do is I'll just make sure that in all the examples that we look at and all the problem sets, that it's always so many dollars per unit of the foreign currency. So in other words, that means that we'll always be able to use this formula. But you should be aware that if this is reversed, there's another formula that we would use in its place. Okay, so here they're just doing the same example. Now, this is the proof of why this works, by the way. What they're going to show us here is that if I were to, let's say, put $1 million in a euro dollar account for 6 months or 180 days, it's easy to determine that at the end of these 6 months or 180 days, I'll have $1,014,450 in my account. You can see how it's done here. I've taken the $1 million and multiplied by the euro dollar rate, R, and then I've adjusted that for the number of days in which I'm keeping my money in that account. So what you're seeing here is the future value of $1 million. Now, suppose that I decide that, you know what, I can see that the euro sterling rate is higher than the US dollar or euro dollar rate. Why don't I deposit my dollars, or actually, why don't I convert my dollars into pounds and deposit them in a euro sterling account to take advantage of the higher interest rate? What's wrong with that? Well, nothing, except all of a sudden, you've got to take on some foreign exchange risk. Okay. So anyway, and this is getting at the heart and soul of this interest rate parity condition. So if an American investor decides to try to take advantage of higher euro sterling rates, he or she can convert dollars into pounds and then deposit them into a euro sterling account. Unfortunately, this exposes the investor to foreign exchange risk. So let's say that we don't want that. The only way to avoid that would be to do this. To avoid the foreign exchange risk, the investor would enter into a forward contract to exchange the proceeds of the euro sterling account for dollars. When the deposit matures. Okay, in other words, instead of just leaving the money there, like here, for example, you're putting in $1 million for 6 months later, you're guaranteed to have $1,014,450. If instead I convert these into pounds and deposit them in a euro sterling account, there'll be some pound amount that'll be guaranteed to have in 6 months. What I'm proposing to do is take that amount of money, that amount of pounds rather, and enter into a forward contract to exchange them into dollars in 6 months. Now, what that will do is eliminate the foreign exchange risk. But, well, we're going to see what happens in that case. All right. And this will give us some great insight into how this interest rate parity condition works. So let's say that's my strategy. I'm going to convert my dollars into pounds, deposit them in a euro sterling account, and then 6 months later, I will withdraw my sterling and then sell it through a forward contract for dollars. Let's see what would happen. So I convert dollars to pounds at the spot exchange rate, invest them at the euro sterling rate, and sell pounds forward to avoid my foreign exchange risk. So how much will I have in the future if I do this? So we start with the spot exchange rate here. We convert it into dollars today, and we'll have 534,959.61 pounds. That gets deposited into a euro sterling account for 6 months or 180 days. And at that time, my deposit will be worth 547,670.52. That's the amount that will then sell forward through a forward contract for dollars. Now, because we've already seen that the implied forward exchange rate is 185.23, that is the rate at which I will be able to sell my pounds in 6 months. So if that happens, in 6 months, these pounds will be worth, we multiply these out, and guess what? That number should look familiar. $1,014,450. So wait a minute, what happened here? When I deposited my funds in a euro dollar account, I ended up with $1,014,450. If I deposit, or if I trade my dollars for pounds and deposit my funds in a euro sterling account, but enter into a forward contract, I also wind up with $1,014,450. So that forward exchange rate can be thought of as the only exchange rate at which the returns to both currencies are equal to each other. So the implied forward exchange rate from the interest rate parity condition is the only forward exchange rate at which the returns to investing, I should say the guaranteed returns, investing in dollars and investing in euro sterling are equal to each other. Any other exchange rate would lead to a higher return from one of the current two currencies. And that's where the arbitrage comes in. So what would happen then is that what you're effectively doing here is you would be borrowing in the country that has the lower rate of return and investing in the country with a higher rate of return and locking in a risk-free profit. So it's a fairly complicated thing to demonstrate, but we're going to do that next time. And we'll see how violations of the interest rate parity condition will result in arbitrage profits. But the logic is that the rate of return to the sterling and the pound, the sterling and the dollar will be the same after we take into account the exchange rate differential, which is offset exactly by this forward contract. So anyway, so this is where it's starting to get even more intense. Once that's done, the rest will be smooth sailing, but this is the trickiest part of the chapter. So, given how late it is, I think we can stop here. Next time we meet, we'll go back and revisit all this, of course, just to make sure our memories are refreshed before we do any more examples. So for now, just keep in mind, and I'll remind you that next week is spring break. We'll be off. The following week, we'll wrap this up, and then we'll move on to the next chapter. Okay, so in the meantime, I'll go into MindTap and make sure that the assignments have been adjusted so that ideally you don't have to do any assignments during spring break, and also that we are not getting behind with the material. Okay, so that being the case, I guess I'll just see you all in 2 weeks. And then we have to figure out a date that we can meet in person again. All right, don't forget about that little detail. We still have to meet 2 more times in person for some reason. So we'll decide next week what those dates will be. Okay. All right. So anyway, I'll see you all next time.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.